Danish developer Playdead's sophomore outing Inside is dense with subtext, dealing in control, authority, and unchecked immoral science. One thing Inside isn't is a story. Now bear with me here. What if I were to say everything was staged? An elaborate scientific test with one simple goal, proving that we, the player, exist. And that the world we're presented is not just a video game, but an alternate reality that not only suspects our existence, but also has the means of proving it. Now, I want to make one thing clear. This isn't an Inside Explain video. This is just After my initial playthrough of Inside, I was left reeling with questions, and like most, started to construct a story around the events I had experienced. Then I discovered the second ending, and something clicked. There was no story here, and the entire game had been an experiment conducted by the inhabitants of the game's universe to prove that we, the player, exist. And after hours of replays and research, I came to understand how Playdead used the medium of video games to execute a fantastic meta non-narrative. Now, in order to justify my theory, I'll be examining 4 points in this video. 1. The world we traverse cannot be taken as real. 2. The facility has the power and resources to stage an experiment on such a grand scale. 3. The blob's importance is manufactured by the player. 4. How the orbs and secret ending betray our existence. Before getting into the meat of this video, I want to talk about diegesis. In relation to video games, it encompasses the narrative world, characters, objects, and actions, existing in-universe and discoverable or observable by the inhabitants of that universe. Non-diegetic elements such as health bars, QTE prompts, and the like are only known to the player, and that's an aspect that makes Inside a little unique, because nearly every element is diegetic, from a reel-to-reel tape player and its secret audio code, to a light board directing the player to an underground bunker. Hell, even the way the camera moves and sways makes it seem like it's an actual camera. And at no point does the game give us any information that our avatar, the boy, would not be able to perceive. And by extension, we are unable to perceive anything the boy cannot. We're never outside. From moment 1, the boy's inside the facility. Take the forest we start in. It's directly mirrored by an artificial binome found in an abandoned, flooded section of the facility. Why start here then? To establish to us that there is an outside, an area outside the influence of the facility, which is painted as a villainous scientific cabal. As for the boy, thanks to the second ending, where we learned that he was a husk the entire time, we come to realize that he's not the protagonist of the story, because he has no agency. In the end, there is no story, other than the one that we create for ourselves. We're misled from the moment the game begins, with an artificial setting, an unreliable narrator, and player agency manipulated through lack of context. Now, in order to hammer home how important context is, I'm going to compare Inside to one of my favorite games from the last few years. From Software's Bloodborne. Now, despite their moment-to-moment gameplay having nothing to do with one another, both Inside and Bloodborne from the onset are narratively presented as mysteries, with character backstories left pretty much unexplored. But whereas Bloodborne creates context through NPCs, cutscenes, gameplay mechanics, and notes to expand and cement the rules of its universe, Inside leaves the player in the dark, forcing us to create a narrative based solely on observation. And as I've said before, we can't really believe anything we see. In Bloodborne, we're given context, but with Inside, we create context. And the difference between the two is why at the end of Bloodborne, we're able to understand our transformation into an infant Great One, and yet, with Inside, we're left confused by our transformation and death as the Blob. So then, what is the facility? Simply put, it's a place where science happens, and if that sounds a little broad, it's because it is. During our journey through the facility, we traverse the abandoned remains of previous test sites, the farm with its parasite-infested livestock, a cityscape with anti-personnel sentries, a device emanating shockwaves capable of disintegrating a body from hundreds of meters away. Ideas seemingly conceptualized, built, and tested with no rhyme or reason other than to see if it could be done. And thanks to Inside's lack of context, we're unable to determine whether these scientific marvels are even all that marvelous. It's also telling that we never see any of this amazing technology being used by the workers. Why use a bathysphere if you can just give yourself the ability to breathe endlessly underwater? Because the facility is entirely manned by husks, a shuffling, disposable workforce created in the facility and ready to do any and all tasks. Why? Well, if the facility's current experiment is to play out as theorized, then there's no margin for error. And what better way to execute that than with the ultimate double-blind test? Researchers with no bias or moral objections, and a subject unaware. What about the masked people? They're clearly delineated from the husks by use of a simple white mask, and encountered unavoidably at 3 points: the forest, the city, and the theater. In the forest, they establish to us that we should avoid their notice at all costs, or be captured. In the city, they observe as we're forced to mimic the husks surrounding the boy, heavily foreshadowing the second ending reveal. Finally, in the theater, after merging with the blob, they watch from the shadows as we're taunted with a pneumatic box, before discarding us in a watery tank. Abandoned, the same as the facility's other experiments. And for a really long time, I thought that they were humans until I reviewed a sequence near the end of the game. Did you catch that? A cage of husks dressed exactly like the guards patrolling the forest. Husks disguised as authority figures hidden behind a white mask. A simple visual cue telling us that these are the bad guys, when in truth, they're simply pawns. So, why is the blob even important? One of the most popular story theories posits that the blob is controlling the boy, and by extension us. However, if that's the case, why involve the player at all? Aside from the obvious conceit of it being a video game. To us, the blob is important because it represents a goal. A goal given implicit weight by the lead up to its reveal, by researchers hurriedly running to its containment capsule, excitedly pressed against the observation window, telling us visually that this is important. Something big is about to happen, and we're not seeing the aftermath. Now we've got a front row seat. And yet, when we finally enter its capsule, the blob is passively inert, only weakly grasping at the boy until we can remove 3 of the 4 probes attached to it. Because in the end, they've gathered to watch not the blob, but us interact with the blob. The blob which, when we really think about it, ends up being nothing more than an 11th hour MacGuffin, a goal that further allows us to craft a story around our experience. Then everything gets flipped upside down. We become the blob, escape containment, and make a rampaging dash for freedom. And what a gloriously cathartic experience it is, right? After hours of sneaking around in an attempt to avoid death and capture, we become an engine of chaos and destruction. It's such a hard shift, both tonally and in gameplay, that it's easy to miss things. Like a simple diorama of a peaceful sandy coastline with a single ray of light. And in the end, our escape culminates in the single moral decision we're given in the game. Kill the man in the office, or let him live. For the longest, I never realized this was an option, gleefully reducing him to a splatter under the assumption that somehow his death would end the horrors of the facility. Yet, in the grand scheme, his death means nothing, and any perceived importance evaporates along with him as soon as he hits the ground. And instead of a final dash for freedom, we're presented with a series of slow, plotting puzzles, funneling us to the theater where the blob, supposed masterwork of the facility, is unceremoniously abandoned. And with this part of the experiment concluded, we're left to dispose of ourselves. On a peaceful sandy coastline, under a single ray of sunlight, free. And here at the end is where it all comes together. You see, to the inhabitants of Inside's universe, we are a malignant alien intelligence capable of controlling husks and running amok. Now, let's pretend we inhabit the universe of Inside. Let's also say that husks are utilized outside the facility, as ubiquitous as cell phones are in our world. Now, imagine that one day husks start killing humans. Tests are done, but there's no difference between these aberrations and every other husk. The situation becomes so dire that the use and production of husks stop, ending in a worldwide socio-economic collapse. Finally, let's say this hasn't happened yet. As unlikely a scenario as it is, it's clear from the breadth and width of the facility that the slightest possibility of that occurring is worth exploring. And in a world where mind control is a reality, how does one control a mind from outside that reality? By tricking it into thinking it's just playing a game. The events of Inside are nothing more than a carefully crafted maze with the player as the rat, and thanks to a lack of context, we're forced to take what we see as truth. With all that said, The first ending wouldn't provide enough concrete evidence needed to prove our existence. That's where the second ending comes in. Over the course of the game, we have the opportunity to disable a series of orbs hidden throughout the facility, 14 to be exact. In early locations, they're simply hidden away. However, the closer to the blob, the more complex finding and disabling them becomes. 3 of them bear a little extra attention. In the bunker under the cornfield is the second orb, a dark room with a photograph, which, in my opinion, clearly depicts the blob, a locked vault door, and an inactive control panel. The 5th orb's location in the city isn't anywhere as interesting. However, the reel-to-reel tape player certainly is, playing a series of tones. Finally, behind the blob's containment capsule is the massive 14th orb, with wires from the previous 13 terminating in a board with 13 lit bulbs. Once disabled, all but the second bulb flicker out, the bunker. From this final orb, we make our way to face our inevitable end. But the fact that the orbs have been disabled means that the second journey isn't a reversal of time, but a continuation. This is a different boy, and this new journey takes place after the previous. Making our way back to the bunker, we find the previously inactive control panel is now powered, and after playing the tones from the tape player, the door opens into a long dark passage, leading to a room with a few unused orbs, a series of computers connected to an all too familiar helmet, and a power cable. And this room is ultimately the nerve center of the facility. Everything controlled by a bank of computers, conceptualizing, building, and testing. And when we finally pull the cable, we reach our second ending. The computers spark, power down, and the boy slumps to the floor, the same as any other inactive husk. And it's in this ending we betray our existence as an outside alien influence, capable of taking control of not one but 2 husks, locating and disabling the orbs, making note of the tape player tones, solving the vault puzzle, and ultimately disabling the facility, hidden under the veneer of tried and true gameplay conceits. In the end, Inside isn't the story of a boy trying to save his friends or family, or of a blob seeking freedom. It's nothing more than another experiment in a series of never-ending experiments. If you agree with me, please leave a comment and like below. And if you don't, definitely leave a comment, because there are many ways of viewing Inside. But in the end, this has just been my take. What's yours?